There's a problem with that Wired article on Brandon Sanderson. It doesn't go far enough. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me being mean on the internet, because fantasy is a safe space no longer, and I'm here to make that clear. So we're here to talk about the whole kerfuffle about Brandon Sanderson's portrait in Wired, and the response, and all the other stuff that happened yesterday and the day before, and why everyone is getting it wrong for some reason. And I'm here to explain all of that. We'll talk about the process here. We're not talking about Brandon Sanderson's personal life that much. We're not going to talk about his books, which are bad, and, other stuff, because I want to analyze what's happening in the larger fantasy discourse today. So, let's do that. Oh, quick update, what happened? Well, Wired wrote a portrait on Brandon Sanderson called Brandon Sanderson is Your God. It was a personal portrait of him, his family, Dragonsteel, and all of that stuff around him. It was not very much about his books, which is fine. And as these kind of portraits go, it was good. It was solid. It was, well, as I said, it was personal, but I've read much meaner portraits in other journals and magazines about politicians, artists, and whatnot. They usually are like that, author hangs out with the artist for a while and writes down some personal quirks and shit and tries to portray some kind of message. It does touch on a few very interesting aspects of the whole Brandon Sanderson Cosmere production line, which I would really like to explore in a future video that, looks at these kind of things, but not today. It does really look at the phenomenon Brandon Sanderson. And the internet got wild, and every Sanderson fan, every fantasy fan, read it as an attack on themselves and went to bat for Saint Brandon. And, then Brandon Sanderson went to Reddit and said, you know what, guys, I get the guy, he was attacking us fantasy fans, which is mean, but he had to do this because, deadlines, poor loser, I don't bear him any ill will, so please don't do that either. And the internet was, whoa, Sandy, you're so good. I guess I'll just buy some more of your books because you're such a nice guy, and moral grandstanding should pay off. And that's exactly what happened. So, why is that A, inevitable, and B, a problem? That's what we're here for to look at now. Alright, so here's the thing. This is capitalism, which sucks. And in capitalism, people try to make money. Also, our capitalism, through, the invention of the internet and social media, has become more and more about personal brands, about brands and parasocial relationships. Now, everyone on the internet is already talking about this for years and has probably moved on, but since the fantasy sphere is always, a couple of years behind in everything, I guess we need to talk about it now, because that's actually what is happening here. See, if you want to sell shit to people, you need to make them want that stuff, which is, how capitalism works, especially if you're selling stuff that is not absolutely necessary for survival, like, food and housing and all these things that should actually be free because, capitalism sucks. So what do? You make advertisements, right? We all remember the glorious days when we didn't have, ad blockers and shit, and watching YouTube was a pain in the ass, that kind of stuff, right? Or the 80s when we had fun, or 70s when we had fun advertisements about how women should drink more alcohol so they can stand their husbands and stuff like that, We try to, do different things to market shit to people, which is, what happens. Now with social media, what has happened is the rise again of the personal brand. Now we've had that before. Artists have often been, somewhat of rock stars and had a cult of personality or so forth. But nowadays, everyone does that because that's how social media work. We put ourselves out there. I do that right now. We more or less carefully cater, build and curate a personality that we present to the world. We hope that people kind of fall in love with that personality to then buy shit. Which, that's just how that works. And it is wildly successful because we tend to form connections with people, hence, the idea of, trusting people that we have that kind of connection to and so forth, which is why you usually had, nice people in advertisements or famous people in advertisements and so forth. Now, we've moved beyond that even more to build up these ideas. So the concept of parasocial relationships has been around for a while. As I said, the rest of the world has talked about it. It started, in the 60s, 70s, when people had like very personal attachments to specific characters in television. With the influencer economy that we have nowadays, it is obviously much directer and so forth. And companies have understood that, and they're building on that. That's why they pay influencers to shit. Or, well, yeah, try to take their own people and turn them into sort of influencers. And, well, even book publishers have caught on to that. Nowadays, most or a lot of publishers require their authors to have social media profiles on different media networks. You have to have, some actually contractually require artists or writers to have a Twitter account and a Facebook account and probably TikTok soon, who knows, to, market themselves and build those connections to the fans, be accessible, be there. And what happens then is that, readers of fiction do form a parasocial relationship with their favorite authors. Because nowadays you get all of their info, depending on how, seriously they are taking that job. And, post pictures of their cats and stuff. And that's why they then go and buy more of these books, because they like the person. And that is a marketing strategy, first and foremost, run by big companies. And, well, Brandon Sanderson is a marketing genius and jumped into that game earlier than most. See, Sanderson started out, and then he got his big boost through writing finishing the Wheel of Time novels, and then he took all of that and used it into building up his media empire, in a way. Which is, fine. And, I don't blame him for that. Not in general. But what happened is that Sanderson has always been about Brandon Sanderson. Lots of communication with fans, podcasts where he talks about writing and stuff, all of these things. People are attached to Brandon Sanderson as a person, and they see him themselves in Sanderson in a lot of ways, because he can be, charming and fun to listen to. And his enthusiasm for fantasy does bleed through, or he's a very good actor, I don't know. But that's what I've gathered from, watching his lectures on how to write fantasy, which are solid, I guess. Although I personally have issues with them, but I'm not a writer, so what do I know? But the point is, Brandon Sanderson has built a brand that is about Sanderson. So what Wired had to do to look at the phenomenon of Brandon Sanderson being the best-selling fantasy author right now was to look at the person. And that's how media, journalism happens these days, because everyone is a personal brand. You need to talk about the personality and about the person and not about their work, which is, what happened. And on the other side, because we form these parasocial relationships with authors, well, we are supposed to do so because, it sells books and stuff. Everyone who kind of likes Brandon Sanderson, has that sort of parasocial relationship, felt that he was insulted because he doesn't come across as the, best person in the world, or at least, because we kind of feel that we're sort of like Sanderson. If we read something critical of him in that text, we feel attacked too. It's like, oh, they're going after the nerds again. Let's all stand up and fight. Which is exactly the reaction that needed to be provoked there. Now, obviously, that's a stupid reaction, but it happens. What happens in that situation is people go either, to do all kinds of mean things and send death threats and whatnot to YouTubers and writers at Wired and all of these kind of things, or something else happens. And that is where Brandon Sanderson comes in. Sanderson is, as I said, a marketing genius and pretty good at communicating. And he wrote that Reddit post. And that Reddit post is bad. I mean, it's effective, but it's bad. Because he frames the whole thing as, well, him being morally superior by calling off his people, like, don't harass anyone, don't go after the guy. Jason is a nice guy, he was just trying to do his job. And in that job, he went after all of us because we're fantasy fans. And He's an outsider, which is disingenuous because, according to, well, the article, the writer has read a multiple Brandon Sanderson novels and read a lot of fantasy and science fiction over the last over his life. So he's definitely not one of these assholes from up there, those snobs that always come after us fantasy fans for our childish books. So that's actually factually wrong what Sanderson is writing there. And then he goes up, but be nice to him. Poor boy has to do this. I understand. I feel, somewhat hurt, but what can I do? Be nice. And everyone loves Sanderson even more. He turns that emotion that has happened, the risen emotion that was created through the parasocial relationship and the perceived attack, even though it was not exactly an attack, on Brandon Sanderson, he turns that attention towards him and not that energy, that willingness to do something. He turns it towards him, who comes out as, well, morally superior, almost a saint in comparison to that guy, towards him. So what will people do to show their love for Sanderson, to show their support for their moral hero? What will they do? Well, I guess they'll go and probably spend more money on Brandon Sanderson, who is a nice guy and just like us, a little quirky. And that's why I pull out the Terry Pratchett quote there, which is, credit where credit's due. Brandon Sanderson has read Terry Pratchett. I doubt he's understood him, but that's another thing. My point is, it works out for Sanderson. You could call this either very cynical or very naive. I can't judge. I feel it is somewhat naive because Sanderson does these kind of things. Remember, like a while ago when he was talking about audiobooks and why he's not putting his books on Audible? Yes, Audible has terrible business practices. So yeah, that's terrible. But he puts his audiobooks on Spotify because they're not a terrible company that has been, fucking over artists forever. That's sort of the point there. So he can moral grandstand and profit from it afterwards. And that's the thing that is happening with Brandon Sanderson right now, because that's the economy we're living in. And because fantasy hasn't really caught up to that, I feel. We are still sort of easily bowled over by these kind of strategies. Now, it could be that Sanderson genuinely means all the things that he does. I can't judge that. But even if he doesn't, others will do that, because that's how capitalism as a system works. Other people will exploit that even more. He has trailblazed there with his Kickstarter last year, with all these things. He has turned himself into a brand, built a machine behind it, that is Dragonsteel Productions, or publishing or whatever it's called, has built a company behind all of that and is using his personality to make a shitload of money. And that doesn't happen without more or less cynically manipulating people into giving him money. Because that's how the system works. Now, whether you get something of value in return is the question. If you enjoy one of his books, then yeah, it probably was worth like $10. But was it worth hundreds of dollars for limited editions? That's the added thing where it gets more difficult, and where that parasocial love and support does come in. So that's the first part of what happened, and why I think we need to be wary, because this will happen more and more, because we are moving towards that idea that authors are people that we need to have a personal connection with, and so forth. Let's look at the second part, the darker part. Death of the author is over. We are back to authorial intent, but we are back to a very specific form of authorial intent, which is living authors are our people. We can talk to them, and their opinion is the gold standard for interpreting their texts. It is even beyond just death of the author. It's what I feel, called apotheosis of the author, because the author becomes that god. Because, see, it's a parasocial relationship we're having, which means one person has all the power and the other person doesn't have any, because Brandon Sanderson doesn't care about us. I mean, he probably cares about his fans, I accept that, but he doesn't care about a specific individual one of us. Neither does any other author, unless they know us personally. They don't care about individuals, but they have all that power, and we follow them, and we believe them. We hang on their every word, unless, they become transphobic, and then we really, really hate them. And that's fine, because that's the downside of this form of brand, personal brand thing in literature. J.K. Rowling is a very good example for that as well. But what it also does, it makes criticizing the work more and more difficult, because if you criticize the work, you criticize the author, you insult the author, you insult all his fans with the author, and now we're angry again. And that makes critical thinking, that makes critical discourse and critical engagement with texts more and more difficult for those who want to do it. And that is a problem, because art and entertainment are powerful when it comes to forming our will, when it comes to forming our thoughts and our worldviews. And we should be critical of those. We should look at them, we should critically engage with them and point out the bad bits without having a mob trash our, email inboxes, especially if we're not, very masculine on the internet, because we said, well, maybe this wasn't as well done as it could have been. We should kind of avoid that, and that's the dark side, that where the switch to a very specific personal brand and exploiting parasocial relationships to make money in the book market does hamper critical discourse and engagement with books afterwards. And at the end of the day, we just, show off our new limited editions to prove to all the other fans how much more super fans we are and how much closer to Brandon Sanderson, or any other author for that matter, in the whole parasocial relationship game we are. And all the words don't matter anymore. And the meaning behind the words doesn't matter either, because at the end of the day, we can just ask the author, and they'll probably put out a Twitter thread somewhere to explain the world to us. So we'll just buy the books and leave them shrink wrapped, because then we can sell them later when they've got out more value. And I hate all of that. Really, it sucks. So be wary. Don't protect Brandon Sanderson. He doesn't need our protection. This was not an attack on fantasy fans as such. It was just a portrait about a probably nice guy who is just not very interesting. And that's fine too. I'm not very interesting either. I'm not even funny. All right. Anyway, that's it for now. Come to the live stream and yell at me if you want later tonight. Or, leave a comment. Do something. Do the YouTube things. I'll be around to discuss all of this. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, cheers.